The neon sign of Jerry's 24-hour diner flickered ominously against the relentless downpour, buzzing with the sound of a dying fly. Inside, Tessa Reynolds wiped down the counter for the 100th time that night, her movements mechanical. At 23, Tessa's life was a series of calculations. Rent due on the 1st, her brother's tuition due on the 15th, and the menacing medical bills for her mother arriving like clockwork at the end of the month. "Go home, Tess," Jerry grunted from the kitchen, wiping grease from his forehead. "Nobody's coming in this weather. The city's drowning." "I just need to take the trash out, Jerry. Then I'm gone," she called back, untying her apron. She grabbed the heavy black bags, swinging the back door open. The alleyway was a wind tunnel, the rain stinging her face like icy needles. She tossed the bags into the dumpster and turned to leave, but a sound stopped her. It was a low, guttural groan. Tessa froze. She squinted into the darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs. The alley was usually empty, save for the occasional stray cat, but tonight a dark shape was slumped against the brick wall, half hidden by a stack of discarded wooden pallets. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The shape moved. A hand, slick with something darker than rain, reached out and gripped the edge of a pallet. Tessa's instinct was to run. This was New York. You didn't investigate dark shapes in alleys at 3 a.m. unless you wanted to become a statistic. But then the lightning flashed, illuminating the man's face. He was pale, deathly so, with dark hair plastered to his forehead. He was wearing a suit that cost more than her entire year's salary, but the white dress shirt was soaked in crimson. She didn't think. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees in the mud. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man's eyes snapped open. They were a piercing, icy blue, filled with a terrifying intensity, even as life seemed to be draining from him. Before she could check his pulse, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. "No. Hospitals," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "No. Cops. You've been shot," Tessa said, seeing the dark hole in his abdomen. "You need an ambulance." "Call them, and I'm dead," he hissed, his grip tightening. "And so are you." Tessa stared at him. The threat didn't sound like bluster. It sounded like a promise. She looked at the blood pooling around him, mixing with the rainwater. If she left him, he would die. If she called the cops, he claimed they would both die. "I can't leave you here," she said, her voice shaking. "But I can't treat a gunshot wound in the rain. Just get me inside," he groaned, his head lolling back. Tessa looked around. The street was empty. She hooked her arms under his shoulders. He was heavy, dead weight, solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric. With a grunt of exertion that strained every muscle in her back, she dragged him toward the service entrance. She managed to pull him into the diner's storage room, kicking the heavy steel door shut behind them. She collapsed him onto a pile of clean aprons and towels. Under the harsh fluorescent light, the damage was worse. The bullet had torn through his side. He was losing consciousness. Tessa slapped his cheek lightly. "Hey, stay with me. What's your name?" He looked at her, his vision blurring. He saw chestnut hair, wide brown eyes, filled with fear, but also a fierce determination. He hadn't seen eyes that innocent in 20 years. "Gabriel," he whispered, before the darkness took him. Tessa didn't know that name. She didn't read the financial tabloids or the crime beat sections of the New York Times. She didn't know that Gabriel Sterling, known on the streets as the Architect, was currently the subject of a massive federal manhunt and a gang war with the Donovan crime family. To her, he was just a dying man on her floor. She ran to the kitchen, grabbing the first aid kit, a bottle of Jerry's cheap vodka from under the counter, and a clean steak knife. She had grown up in a rough neighborhood. She knew the basics. Clean the wound, stop the bleeding, pray. "This is going to hurt, Gabriel," she whispered to the unconscious man. She poured the vodka over the wound. His body seized up, a low growl escaping his throat, but he didn't wake. Tessa worked through the night, her hand stained red, terrified that at any moment the door would burst open and the people who did this to him would finish the job. The sun was trying to push through the grey clouds when Gabriel finally opened his eyes. The pain was a dull roar in his side, but he was alive. He blinked, adjusting to the light. He wasn't in a morgue. He wasn't in a police interrogation room. He was on a makeshift bed of towels in a storage room that smelled of flour and old coffee. He tried to sit up, wincing as the stitches pulled tight. He looked down. The wound was dressed neatly with gauze and medical tape. It wasn't professional work, but it was competent. "You're awake." Gabriel's hand instinctively went to his waistband for his gun, but it was gone. He looked up. The girl, Tessa, was sitting on a crate of canned tomatoes, watching him. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her waitress uniform was stained with dried blood. His blood. "I put your gun on the top shelf," she said softly, nodding toward a high metal rack. "I didn't want you to shoot me by accident if you woke up scared." Gabriel let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I don't get scared, sweetheart, and I don't shoot civilians." "You threatened to kill me last night," she pointed out, standing up and handing him a glass of water. "I said they would kill you," Gabriel corrected, taking the water. His hands were steady, despite the blood loss. He downed the water in one gulp. "You should have left me in the alley." "I'm not a murderer," Tessa said simply. "And you looked like you had someone waiting for you." Gabriel looked at her. Someone waiting for him. The irony was bitter. The only people waiting for him were his enemies, specifically Caleb Donovan, the man who had set up the ambush at the warehouse 3 hours ago. Gabriel had been betrayed by his own right-hand man, a rat named Felix. "Who are you?" Gabriel asked, studying her face. He needed to memorize it. If Donovan found out she had helped him, she was a loose end. "Tessa," she said. "Tessa Reynolds." "Well, Tessa Reynolds," Gabriel said, slowly pushing himself to a standing position. The room spun, but he locked his knees, forcing his body to obey. "You just made a very big mistake saving my life." "You're welcome," she said sarcastically, crossing her arms. Gabriel reached into his jacket pocket. His wallet was still there. He pulled out a stack of $100 bills, easily $5,000, and tossed it onto the crate. "For the medical bills," he said coldly, "and for your silence. Forget you saw me. Forget the name Gabriel. If anyone asks, you were alone all night." Tessa looked at the money. It was more than she made in 3 months. It could pay off her mother's latest treatment. But the way he threw it at her, like she was something he had bought, made her stomach turn. "I didn't do it for the money," she said quietly. "Everyone does it for the money," Gabriel replied, buttoning his ruined jacket to hide the bloodstains. He moved toward the back door. He paused with his hand on the latch. He didn't look back at her. "Clean up the blood on the floor. Bleach destroys DNA. Do it now." "Wait." Tessa stepped forward. "You can barely walk. You're going to bleed out again." "I have work to do," Gabriel said. "And you have a life to live. Keep it that way." He pushed the door open and vanished into the morning mist. Tessa stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a creeping dread. She looked at the stack of cash on the crate. She should burn it. She should run. Instead, she grabbed the mop bucket and the bleach. She scrubbed the floor until her hands were raw, erasing every trace of the man named Gabriel. By the time Jerry arrived at 6 a.m. to open up, the storage room was spotless. Tessa was sitting at the counter, drinking a cold cup of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "Rough night?" Jerry asked, tying on his apron. "You have no idea," Tessa murmured. She thought it was over. She thought he was just a random criminal who would disappear back into the shadows. She was wrong. 2 days later, Tessa was walking home from her shift. Her apartment was only 4 blocks away, a small walk-up in a gritty part of Queens. She had her headphones in, trying to drown out the city noise. She didn't notice the black SUV trailing her at a crawl. She turned the corner onto her street and stopped. Her apartment building was surrounded by police cars. Blue and red lights flashed against the brickwork. Her neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, was standing on the sidewalk, clutching her robe. "Mrs. Higgins, what happened?" Tessa ran over, panic gripping her chest. "Oh, Tessa," the old woman gasped. "It's your apartment. Someone broke in. They tore the place apart." Tessa's blood ran cold. Was anyone hurt? My mum is at the center, right?" "Nobody was home, thank God," Mrs. Higgins said. "But the police said it didn't look like a robbery, dear. They said it looked like they were searching for something." Tessa felt the ground sway beneath her. Searching for something. Gabriel. She hadn't told anyone. She had bleached the floor. She had burned the bloody towels. How did they know? "Miss Reynolds?" Tessa turned. A man in a plain grey suit was standing behind her. He had a badge clipped to his belt, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. It was cold, predatory. "Detective Miller," he said. "Wait, Miller is on the ban list. Correction." "Detective Harrison," he said. "We found something interesting in your apartment. A shell casing, 9mm. Matches a shooting we had downtown 2 nights ago involving a very high-profile individual." Tessa's heart stopped. She hadn't found a shell casing. Gabriel must have dropped it from his clothing when she undressed him to treat the wound. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. Detective Harrison stepped closer, invading her personal space. He lowered his voice. "I don't think you understand, Tessa. We know Gabriel Sterling was at the diner. We know you helped him. And right now, there are very powerful people I can't stop, who want to know where he went. He wasn't a cop, or if he wasn't working for the law." The look in his eyes was the same look Gabriel had, the look of a wolf. "I need you to come with me," Harrison said, reaching for her arm. Suddenly, a screech of tires pierced the air. A sleek, matte black sedan mounted the curb, cutting off the detective and separating him from Tessa. The back door flew open. A massive man, built like a tank with a shaved head, stepped out. He ignored the detective entirely and looked straight at Tessa. "Ms. Reynolds," the giant rumbled. "Mr. Sterling sends his regards. Get in." Tessa looked at the fake detective, then at the massive stranger, and realized with terrifying clarity her life as a waitress was over. She was now a pawn on the board. She scrambled into the back of the black sedan, just as the detective drew his weapon. The car peeled away, tires smoking, disappearing into the night before the first shot could be fired. The interior of the sedan smelled of rich leather and expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the scent of bleach and fear that had clung to Tessa for the last 48 hours. The giant who had shoved her into the back seat sat in the front passenger seat, his silence heavier than any threat. The driver, a woman with a sharp bob cut and eyes like flint, navigated the New York traffic with aggressive precision. "Where are you taking me?" Tessa asked, her voice sounding small in the cavernous back seat. She gripped her purse, her knuckles white. Inside was her phone, currently buzzing with texts from her landlord about the police raid, but she was too terrified to answer. "Safety," the giant rumbled. He didn't turn around. "Name's Cole. Sit back. If Harrison wanted you, he would have shot you on the sidewalk. You're lucky the boss keeps tabs on his loose ends." Loose ends. That's what she was. A thread dangling from a cheap sweater, waiting to be snipped. The car didn't head toward the police precinct or a warehouse. Instead, it wove through the city toward Manhattan, pulling up to the curb of a massive glass needle, piercing the skyline on 57th Street, the Sterling Tower. It was a monolith of steel and arrogance, a building Tessa had only ever seen on postcards. Cole opened the door. "Out! Keep your head down! Don't look at the doorman!" Tessa was marched through a private lobby, bypassed the main elevators, and shoved into a freight lift that required a key card and a retinal scan from Cole. The sensation of rising was rapid, her ears popping as they ascended 70 floors in seconds. When the doors slid open, Tessa gasped. She wasn't in an apartment. She was in a palace in the sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park, currently drowning in the rain. The floors were marble, the furniture stark and modern. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly soulless. Standing by the window, looking out at the city like he owned every brick of it, was Gabriel. He looked nothing like the dying man she had dragged through the mud. He was wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark hair was slicked back, and his posture was rigid, likely due to the stitches she knew were pulling at his side. He turned. The icy blue eyes landed on her, devoid of the vulnerability she had seen in the alley. "You look terrible, Tessa," he said, his voice smooth and deep. "I just got kidnapped by a giant," Tessa snapped, her fear momentarily eclipsed by anger. "And my apartment was raided by a fake cop. I think I'm allowed to look a little rough." Gabriel walked toward her, moving slightly slower than a healthy man would, his hand hovering near his injured side. He stopped a few feet away. "Harrison isn't fake. He's a real detective. He's just on Caleb Donovan's payroll. There's a difference." "Donovan?" Tessa asked. "The man who put the bullet in me," Gabriel explained calmly. "And the man who now knows that a waitress named Tessa Reynolds saved my life. Which means he assumes you know something, or that you mean something to me." Tessa laughed, a hysterical bubbling sound. "That's ridiculous. I'm nobody. I'm a waitress at a diner that smells like grease. Tell them I'm nobody." "It doesn't matter what is true," Gabriel said, stepping closer, his presence overwhelming. "In my world, perception is currency. Donovan thinks you are an asset, therefore you are a target. If I leave you out there, you will be dead by sunrise, tortured first, likely, to see what secrets you hold." Tessa felt the blood drain from her face. She thought of her mother, safe in the dialysis center. "My mum is being moved as we speak," Gabriel interrupted. "Private facility in Connecticut, fully paid for, round-the-clock security." Tessa stepped back, horror dawning on her. "You kidnapped my mother?" "I secured her," Gabriel corrected. "Just like I secured you. You saved my life, Tessa. I pay my debts. I can't let you die, and I certainly can't let Donovan use you to get to me." "So what? I'm a prisoner?" Gabriel gestured to the sprawling penthouse. "You're a guest. You will stay here until the threat is neutralized. You will not leave this floor. You will not contact anyone from your old life. Your phone?" He held out his hand. "No." Tessa clutched her bag. Cole stepped forward, his shadow engulfing her. Gabriel didn't even blink. "Give it to me, Tessa, or Cole will take it. They can track the GPS." Trembling, Tessa handed over her phone. Gabriel dropped it into a glass of water on the coffee table. It fizzled and died. "There are clothes in the guest suite," Gabriel said, dismissing her as he turned back to the window. "Dinner is at 8. Do not be late. I detest tardiness." Tessa stood there, stripped of her communication, her home, and her freedom. She looked at the back of the man she had saved. "I should have left you in the alley," she whispered. Gabriel didn't turn around, but his reflection in the glass smiled, a shark showing its teeth. "Yes, you should have. But you didn't. And now you belong to the Sterling organization." 3 days passed in the gilded cage. Tessa quickly learned that boredom was a different kind of torture. The penthouse was filled with things to do, a library of first editions she was afraid to touch, a home theater, a gym, but the silence was deafening. Gabriel was rarely seen. He spent his time in his office behind double oak doors, where muffled shouting and the ringing of phones drifted out. When she did see him, it was at dinner. These meals were excruciating. They sat at opposite ends of a long mahogany table, eating food prepared by a silent chef. Gabriel would read documents while he ate, barely acknowledging her presence, but Tessa was watching. She was a waitress. Her entire livelihood had depended on reading people. She noticed the way Gabriel winced when he reached for the salt. She noticed the way he checked his watch every 5 minutes. She noticed that the security guards, Cole and a new guy named Weston, were tense, their hands always hovering near their jackets. The war Gabriel had mentioned was going badly. On the 4th night, the atmosphere shifted. Gabriel didn't come to dinner alone. He brought guests. "Wear the black dress in the closet," Gabriel had ordered her through the intercom earlier that afternoon. "And keep your mouth shut unless spoken to. You are my companion for the evening." Tessa had wanted to refuse, but the memory of the security around her mother kept her compliant. She put on the dress. It was silk, elegant, and undoubtedly cost more than her entire life's earnings. When she walked into the dining room, 3 men were already seated. One was Weston, the lawyer type with wire-rimmed glasses. The other 2 were strangers. One was a fat, sweating man named Mr. Henderson, and the other was a lean, reptilian man introduced as Councilman Brady. Gabriel stood up when she entered. He moved to her, his hand resting on the small of her back. The touch burned through the silk. It was possessive, a brand for the others to see. "Gentlemen," Gabriel said, his voice smooth as velvet. "This is Tessa." "The mystery woman," Councilman Brady sneered, eyeing her up and down. "We heard you had a new pet, Gabriel. Didn't know you went for the innocent type." "Tessa is not a pet," Gabriel said, his grip on her tightening warningly. "She is vital to my recovery." They sat. The dinner was a masterclass in tension. They spoke in codes, zoning permits, shipping routes, union disputes. But Tessa knew they were talking about drugs, weapons, and territory. She poured water. She smiled when appropriate. She played the part of the silent doll. But her waitress instincts were screaming. The sweating man, Henderson, was too nervous. He kept wiping his hands on his napkin. He wasn't eating. He was drinking the wine rapidly, but his eyes were darting around the room. The chef brought out the main course, seared scallops with a truffle reduction. The smell was divine. "To new alliances," Gabriel said, raising his glass. "To alliances," Henderson echoed, his voice shaking. As the waiter, a new face Tessa hadn't seen before, placed Gabriel's plate down, Tessa caught a whiff of something. It was faint, buried under the heavy scent of truffle oil and garlic, but she knew it. She had worked in kitchens for 6 years. She knew the smell of spoiled ingredients, and she knew the smell of things that didn't belong. Bitter almonds, It was a scent that didn't belong in a truffle sauce. Gabriel picked up his fork. He was looking at Councilman Brady, his eyes locked in a stare down, completely distracted from the food. He speared a scallop and raised it to his lips. "Stop!" The word ripped out of Tessa's throat before she could think. The room froze. Gabriel paused, the fork inches from his mouth. He looked at her, his expression darkening with annoyance. "Tessa, I told you, don't eat it," Tessa said, standing up. Her legs were shaking, but her voice was firm. "It smells wrong." "It's truffle, you stupid girl," Brady scoffed. "It costs more than you're worth." "It smells like bitter almonds," Tessa insisted, looking directly at Gabriel. "And there are no almonds in this dish. I read the menu." Gabriel's eyes narrowed. He didn't drop the fork. He looked at the waiter who had served him. The young man was pale, sweat beading on his upper lip. "Cole," Gabriel said softly. Cole stepped out of the shadows. "Switch plates with Mr. Henderson," Gabriel ordered, his eyes never leaving the waiter. "Now wait a minute." Henderson stood up, knocking his chair back. I have a gluten allergy. I can't eat that." "Scallops are gluten-free, Henderson," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Eat it." Henderson looked at the plate, then at Gabriel, then at the waiter. Panic exploded in his eyes. "I didn't know. They forced me. Donovan said he'd kill my wife." The waiter suddenly lunged, pulling a ceramic knife from his sleeve, a blade that wouldn't set off the metal detectors. He aimed for Gabriel's neck, but Gabriel was faster than a wounded man had any right to be. He caught the waiter's wrist, twisting it with a sickening crunch. The knife clattered to the table. In the same motion, Gabriel slammed the man's face into the marble table. Chaos erupted. Cole and Weston had their guns drawn instantly. Henderson was blubbering in the corner. Gabriel stood over the groaning waiter, his chest heaving slightly. He looked at the plate of scallops, then slowly turned his head to Tessa. For the first time since she had dragged him into the storage room, he looked at her with something other than annoyance or calculation. He looked at her with respect. "Clear the room," Gabriel barked to Cole. "Take Henderson to the soundproof room. I want to know everything Donovan told him." "And the girl?" Cole asked, gesturing to Tessa, who was trembling by her chair. Gabriel walked over to her. He reached out, and Tessa flinched, expecting a strike. Instead, his hand brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm. "The girl," Gabriel said, his voice low and intense, "just saved my life. Again." He leaned in close, his breath brushing her ear. "You have a good nose, Tessa. Perhaps you are more than just a liability." "I just didn't want you to die on an empty stomach," she whispered, trying to be brave, though her knees felt like water. "Go to your room," Gabriel commanded, stepping back, the mask of the mafia boss sliding back into place. "Lock the door, and don't open it for anyone but me." Tessa fled to the dining room. As she ran down the hallway, she heard the muffled sound of a gunshot from the dining room. She didn't look back. She realized then that she hadn't just saved Gabriel from poison. She had just cemented her place in his war. She wasn't a guest anymore. She was his lucky charm, and Gabriel Sterling was a man who never threw away luck. Back in her room, Tessa leaned against the heavy oak door, sliding the lock into place. Her heart was racing like a trapped bird. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The girl looking back was wearing silk and diamonds, but her eyes were the same terrified eyes from the alleyway. She had to get out. She had to find her mum. She moved to the window, looking down at the dizzying drop to the street below. There was no escape that way. She began to pace the room, looking for anything. A phone, a computer, a note. She opened the drawer of the bedside table. It was empty, except for a single, small, leather-bound book. She picked it up. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. She opened it to the last page. In neat, jagged handwriting, there was a list of names: Donovan, Judge Harrison, Councilman Brady, and at the bottom, freshly written in ink that looked barely dry, Tessa Reynolds, asset. She stared at the word. Asset. Not human. Not savior. Asset. Assets were used. Assets were spent. And when they lost their value, assets were liquidated. Tessa snapped the book shut and hid it under the mattress. Gabriel thought she was just a waitress with a good nose. He didn't know that she had learned how to survive in a world that wanted to crush her long before she met him. If he wanted to play a game of chess, she would have to learn the rules fast. Because in this game, the pawns were the first to die. The silence in the penthouse following the dinner party was heavy, suffocating. The body of the waiter had been removed, the carpet replaced with unnerving speed, but the scent of gunpowder seemed to linger in the air-conditioning vents. Tessa didn't sleep that night. She lay in the massive bed, clutching the stolen ledger to her chest. Asset. The word burned in her mind. She wasn't safe here. She was just an investment that Gabriel was protecting until it paid off. Around 3:02 a.m., a soft knock echoed on her door. "Tessa, open up." It was Gabriel. His voice was strained. Tessa hesitated, then hid the ledger inside her pillowcase and unlocked the door. Gabriel stood in the hallway, his dress shirt unbuttoned, revealing the bandage at his side. It was soaked through with fresh blood. The exertion of the fight in the dining room had torn his stitches. "I can't reach the back," he admitted, his pride clearly taking a hit. "Cole is disposing of the trash. I need you." Tessa's anger warred with her instinct to heal. She sighed, stepping back. "Come in." She made him sit on the edge of the bed. As she peeled back the blood-soaked gauze, she saw the angry, inflamed skin around the bullet wound. He was burning up. "You have a fever," she murmured, cleaning the wound with efficient, gentle hands. "Occupational hazard," Gabriel grunted, his eyes closed. "You did well tonight, with the poison." "I did it because I didn't want to watch a man die while I was eating scallops," Tessa said coldly. "Don't mistake basic human decency for loyalty, Gabriel." Gabriel opened his eyes, catching her wrist as she applied the fresh tape. The heat from his skin was intense. "Loyalty is bought, Tessa. I know that. But instinct, that can't be bought. You have the instinct of a survivor. That's why you're here." "Is that why I'm in your book?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Am I just an asset?" Gabriel went still. His eyes searched hers, dangerous and calculating. "You went through my things." "I was looking for a way out," she countered, not backing down. "I found a ledger. Am I stock to be traded, or collateral?" Gabriel stood up, towering over her despite his injury. The air between them crackled with tension, fear, anger, and something undeniably magnetic. "You are an asset," Gabriel said, his voice low and rough. "In a world of liabilities, Tessa, an asset is the only thing I protect with my life. It means you have value. It means you are essential." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. "And I don't lose my essentials." For a moment, Tessa thought he was going to kiss her. Her breath hitched. But before the distance could close, the penthouse plunged into darkness. The emergency lights bathed the room in a red glow. A siren began to wail, a low, mechanical thrum that vibrated the floorboards. "Get down!" Gabriel roared. He tackled her onto the bed just as the floor-to-ceiling window shattered inward. Glass rained down like diamonds. Two dark figures rappelled into the room from the roof, submachine guns raised. Gabriel rolled off the bed, pulling a handgun from the back of his waistband, one she hadn't even seen. He fired twice. Pop, pop. The first intruder dropped. The second intruder sprayed the room with bullets. Feathers from the pillows exploded into the air, blinding them. Tessa screamed, scrambling across the floor. "The panic room! Go!" Gabriel shouted, returning fire. "I'm not leaving you!" Tessa yelled back. She grabbed a heavy marble lamp from the bedside table and hurled it into the darkness toward the muzzle flash. It struck the intruder's helmet with a sickening crack, stunning him for a split second, enough time for Gabriel to put a bullet in his chest. Silence returned, broken only by the wind howling through the shattered window and the rain pouring in, soaking the expensive carpet. "Cole!" Gabriel barked into his earpiece. "Status." "They're in the lobby." Cole's voice crackled, sounding breathless. "And the elevator shaft. It's a full breach. Donovan isn't playing games anymore. He hired Blackwell mercenaries." Gabriel cursed. He looked at Tessa, who was shivering amidst the glass and rain. He grabbed her hand. "The building is compromised," he said. "We have to move." "Down?" Tessa asked, looking at the door. "No," Gabriel said, pulling her toward the walk-in closet. "Down is death. We go out." He pushed aside a rack of suits to reveal a keypad. He punched in a code. The back wall of the closet hissed and slid open, revealing a dark, narrow chute. "A laundry chute?" Tessa asked, incredulous. "A structural maintenance shaft," Gabriel corrected. "It leads to the subway tunnels below the foundation. It hasn't been used since the 1920s. Go." He shoved her in. Tessa slid into the darkness, spiraling down into the bowels of the city, leaving the shattered luxury of her cage behind. The tunnels were a nightmare of dripping water, rats, and darkness. Tessa and Gabriel emerged 3 miles north of the Sterling Tower, surfacing through a grate in a deserted alley in Hell's Kitchen. Gabriel was in bad shape. The slide had reopened his wound completely. His grey suit was black with blood on the right side. He was leaning heavily on Tessa, his breathing ragged. "We need a car," Gabriel rasped. "There's a safe house. Brooklyn Navy Yard." "You need a hospital," Tessa argued, struggling to support his weight. "No," Gabriel said, his vision swimming. "If I go to a hospital, Donovan wins. He'll finish the job while I'm under anesthesia. Get me to the yard." Tessa looked around. It was 4 a.m. A delivery truck for a bakery was idling at a red light. The driver had hopped out to check the back door. Tessa didn't think. She had spent a lifetime following rules, paying bills, and being the good girl. But the asset in her had woken up. She ran to the truck, jumped into the driver's seat, and hot-wired it, a skill her delinquent brother had taught her years ago, one she swore she'd never use. "Get in!" she screamed at Gabriel. Gabriel stumbled into the passenger seat, just as the baker ran out, shouting. Tessa floored it, the heavy truck lurching forward. The drive to Brooklyn was a blur of adrenaline. Tessa watched Gabriel fade. He was mumbling names, giving orders to ghosts. By the time they crashed through the rusted chain-link fence of the abandoned section of the Navy Yard, he was unconscious. She dragged him into the designated warehouse, container 4B. It was dusty but stocked. There was a cot, a generator, and a military-grade medical kit. For the next 6 hours, Tessa became the doctor she had never been able to afford to become. She stitched him up again, pumped him full of antibiotics and fluids she found in the supply crates. She sat by his side, watching his chest rise and fall, holding the gun he had given her. When Gabriel woke up, the sun was setting through the high windows. He looked at Tessa. She was cleaning her gun, her face smeared with grease and blood, her eyes hard. "You stole a bakery truck," Gabriel said, his voice weak but amused. "It was a sourdough delivery," Tessa said without looking up. "I hope you like bread." Gabriel tried to sit up, but pain pinned him down. "Tessa, Why are you still here? You could have run. You could be halfway to Canada. Tessa finally looked at him. Because my mother is still in that facility in Connecticut. And because... I don't think you're the villain anymore, Gabriel. I think you're just a man who built a castle to hide that he's lonely. Gabriel went quiet. Donovan will come here. He tracked the chip in my watch. I destroyed it an hour ago, but he knows the general radius. Good, Tessa said, standing up. Let him come. Tessa, you don't understand. Caleb Donovan is a butcher. And I'm a waitress who knows how to deal with rude customers, she said, walking over to a stack of crates. And I know something you don't. I know why Donovan is doing this. Gabriel frowned. He wants my territory. No, Tessa said. I heard Henderson talking to him on the phone before the dinner, before you came in. Henderson was crying. He said, I can't find the accounts. The Cayman accounts are empty. Gabriel's eyes widened. The Shadow Fund. Donovan isn't trying to kill you for power, Tessa explained. He's trying to kill you because he stole from the cartel, and he needs your money to pay them back before they skin him alive. He's broke, Gabriel. He's desperate. Gabriel began to laugh. It was a dark, terrifying sound. He's broke? That idiot. If he comes here, Tessa said, he's not coming to shoot you immediately. He needs your biometrics. He needs your fingerprint to unlock the transfer. Which gives us an advantage, Gabriel realized. He looked at Tessa with a new intensity. It wasn't just respect anymore. It was awe. You're not an asset, Tessa. You're a partner. Tell me that when we survive, she said. An hour later, the heavy metal doors of the warehouse blew open. Caleb Donovan walked in, flanked by 6 mercenaries. He looked frantic, his eyes wild. He spotted Gabriel sitting in a chair in the center of the room, looking pale and defeated. Gabriel! Donovan shouted, his voice echoing. Look at you. The King of New York, rotting in a shed. Hello, Caleb, Gabriel said calmly. I hear you're having cash flow problems. Donovan's face twisted. Shut up. Give me the access codes to the Zurich vault, now. Or what? Gabriel asked. Or I kill the girl, Donovan signaled. 2 mercenaries dragged Tessa out from behind a crate. She struggled, kicking and screaming. Let her go, Gabriel said, feigning panic. She's nothing. She's just the help. She's pretty enough to bleed, Donovan sneered, putting a gun to Tessa's head. The code, Gabriel. Or she dies first, then you. Gabriel looked at Tessa. He gave a microscopic nod. Tessa stopped struggling. She looked Donovan in the eye. He can't give you the code, Caleb. Donovan looked down at her. What? He can't give you the code, Tessa said loudly, because the biometric scanner requires a pulse, and if you shoot him, the accounts lock forever. But I know the override password. Donovan paused. Greed flickered in his eyes. You? He told me, Tessa lied smoothly. In the fever. He was delirious. He kept saying it. Prometheus. Donovan laughed. Prometheus, that's the code. Simple. He turned to his men. Watch them. I'm logging in. Donovan pulled out a tablet. He typed in the code. Access denied. It didn't work, Donovan screamed, turning back to Tessa. Maybe it was Icarus? Tessa shrugged. You little... Donovan raised his hand to strike her. That was the mistake. In his rage, he stepped away from his bodyguards. Gabriel moved. He didn't stand up. He dropped to the floor, grabbing the remote detonator taped under his chair. Tessa! Down! Tessa dropped flat. Gabriel pressed the button. The stack of flour sacks behind the mercenaries, rigged with the oxygen tanks from the medical kit and a flare, exploded. It wasn't a bomb, but it was a concussive blast of white powder and fire. The warehouse turned into a blinding white fog. Gunfire erupted. But Gabriel knew the layout. He moved through the smoke like a phantom. 2 mercenaries went down before they knew what hit them. Tessa rolled under a workbench. She saw Donovan stumbling, blinded by the flower, firing wildly. He was backing toward her. She saw a discarded wrench on the ground. She grabbed it. As Donovan backed into a hiding spot, Tessa didn't hesitate. She swung the heavy iron wrench with all her strength, smashing it into the back of his knee. Donovan screamed and collapsed. Before he could raise his gun, a shadow loomed over him. Gabriel emerged from the white fog, blood seeping through his shirt, his gun pointed at Donovan's forehead. "The lesson, Caleb," Gabriel said coldly, "is never underestimate the service staff." Bang! The silence that followed was heavy. The mercenaries, seeing their paymaster dead, fled into the night. They weren't paid enough to fight a ghost. Gabriel dropped the gun and fell to his knees. Tessa scrambled over to him, wrapping her arms around him. "We did it," she sobbed into his ruined shirt. "We're alive." Gabriel held her, burying his face in her hair. "We're alive." The silence of the private wing at St. Jude's Hospital was a stark contrast to the gunfire and explosions of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. For 3 days, Gabriel Sterling had slept, his body recovering from the surgery to repair the damage Donovan's men had done. Tessa Reynolds hadn't left the room. She sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair by the window, watching the rain streak against the glass. She wasn't wearing her waitress uniform anymore. Cole had brought her fresh clothes, cashmere sweaters and tailored trousers that cost more than her brother's tuition. But inside, she still felt like the girl scraping gum off the bottom of diner tables. "You're staring so loud I can hear it." A gravelly voice broke the silence. Tessa jumped, turning to the bed. Gabriel was awake. His face was pale, but those icy blue eyes were sharp, devoid of the feverish haze that had clouded them in the warehouse. "You're alive," Tessa said, letting out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 48 hours. "Disappointed?" Gabriel smirked, though it looked painful. "I'm calculating my overtime pay," she shot back, walking to the bedside. She poured him a glass of water. "You've been out for 3 days. The city is loud. The news is saying Caleb Donovan died in a gas leak explosion at an abandoned warehouse." Gabriel took the water, his fingers brushing hers. "A convenient narrative. My legal team is efficient." He took a sip, then looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "And you? Did you run while the door was open?" "I thought about it," Tessa admitted, "but I have nowhere to go. My apartment is a crime scene. My job is complicated, and my mother is still in your facility in Connecticut." "Your mother is safe," Gabriel said firmly, "and she will stay there until she is fully recovered. As for your job, I'm firing you." Tessa stiffened, pulling her hand away. "Excuse me, after I saved your life? Again?" "I'm firing you as a waitress," Gabriel clarified, the corner of his mouth twitching. "I have a new position in mind, but it requires a specific dress code and a nerves of steel." 6 weeks later, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. It was the annual Sterling Foundation Gala, the first public appearance of Gabriel Sterling since the rumored gang war that had rocked the underworld. The air was thick with whispers. Everyone knew Donovan was dead. Everyone knew Sterling had absorbed his territory. But the question on everyone's lips was, who was the woman? The double doors swung open. The room went silent. Gabriel Sterling walked in, looking like a dark prince in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He walked with a cane, a sleek, black, ebony stick with a silver wolf's head handle. But it didn't make him look weak. It made him look dangerous. And on his arm was Tessa. She wore a gown of deep, midnight blue velvet that cascaded to the floor, slit high up the thigh, Her chestnut hair was swept up, revealing a diamond necklace that glittered under the chandeliers. She didn't look down. She looked straight ahead, her chin high, scanning the room with the observant eyes of a woman who used to track a dozen tables at once. "They're staring," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "Let them," Gabriel murmured, pulling her closer. "They're wondering how a ghost came back to life, and they're terrified of the angel who brought him back." They moved through the crowd. Tessa felt the judgment. She saw the sneers of the socialites who knew her background, the wives of rival mob bosses who saw fresh meat. A woman in a red dress, Mrs. van der Hoven, stepped into their path. She was the wife of a construction magnate with ties to the old Donovan crew. "Gabriel, darling," she purred, ignoring Tessa completely. "We were so worried. And who is this delightful little thing? Is this the nurse we heard about?" The insult was sharp and precise. Tessa felt Gabriel's arm tighten, his muscles coiling. He was about to destroy this woman verbally, or perhaps financially, right there on the spot. But Tessa placed a calming hand on his chest. She stepped forward, smiling sweetly. "Not a nurse, Mrs. van der Hoven," Tessa said, her voice clear and carrying over the nearby chatter. "I'm the one who noticed that your husband's construction firm has been laundering money through shell companies in Jersey. I was just telling Gabriel that the audit trails are fascinatingly sloppy." Mrs. van der Hoven's face went drain white. The champagne glass in her hand trembled. "Enjoy the evening," Tessa added, her smile never faltering. She steered Gabriel away. As they moved toward the balcony, she heard a low chuckle from him. "Remind me never to cross you," he said. "I told you," Tessa replied. "Waitresses hear everything. We're invisible, until we choose not to be." They stepped out onto the balcony, leaving the noise of the party behind. The New York skyline sprawled out before them, a grid of golden lights. It was the same view they had shared from his penthouse, but this time the glass wasn't shattering. Gabriel leaned his cane against the stone railing and turned to face her. The playful demeanor vanished, replaced by a solemn gravity. "I never thanked you," he said softly. "Not properly. For the alley, for the poison, for the warehouse. You paid my mum's medical bills for the next 10 years, Tessa said. "I think we're even." "Money is easy, Tessa. I have too much of it," Gabriel said, stepping closer. He reached into his jacket pocket. "But trust? Trust is expensive. I've spent my life building walls, ensuring no one could get close enough to hurt me. And then you found me in the mud, and you didn't ask for a penny." He pulled out a small black velvet box. Tessa's breath hitched. "Gabriel, I don't do romance, Tessa. I don't do flowers and chocolates," he said, opening the box. Inside sat a ring that was less jewelry and more of a weapon, a massive, emerald-cut diamond flanked by 2 sapphires set in black platinum. "I do protection, I do loyalty, and I do obsession." He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. It was heavy, cool against her skin. "Be my wife," he commanded, though his voice cracked slightly. "Be the queen of this city. Help me rule it, because without you, I'm just a man in an empty tower." Tessa looked at the ring, then up at the man who had terrified her only a month ago. She saw the darkness in him, yes, but she also saw the man who had eaten burnt toast she made in the warehouse just to make her smile. "I'm not going to be a silent trophy, Gabriel," she warned him, tears pricking her eyes. "If I say the scallops are poisoned, you listen." "I will always listen," he vowed. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes." Gabriel didn't wait. He pulled her in, kissing her with a ferocity that made the world spin. It was a kiss of possession, a promise that he would burn the city down before he let anyone touch her again. Below them, the city honked and buzzed, oblivious to the shift in power. The king had found his queen. Gabriel pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. One more thing. What? I bought Jerry's diner, he said casually. Tessa laughed, a bright sound that echoed into the night. You did what? I bought it. I turned it into a shelter for at-risk youth. Jerry is running the kitchen, but I kept one table reserved. Which one? The one near the back, Gabriel smiled. Where the waitress sits when she's tired, just in case you ever need to remember where you came from. But you're never going back there, Tessa. You belong here, at the top. Tessa looked out at the lights of New York. She had saved a life in the dark, and in return, he had given her the stars. I'm ready, she said, squeezing his hand. Gabriel picked up his cane, offered her his arm, and together they turned back toward the ballroom doors. They had a customized empire to run, and the world was waiting to meet Mrs. Sterling, and that is how a stormy night and a split-second decision changed everything for Tessa Reynolds. She went from serving coffee to ruling an empire, proving that sometimes kindness is the most dangerous weapon of all. Gabriel Sterling thought he was the predator, but in the end, he was the one who got captured, heart and soul.